Among the many events that characterized the last years of World War II in Italy, few have managed to settle in our collective imagination. With the same force as the story of the lost gold of Fortezza, a very controversial episode in which the documentary aspect and that of urban legend or war legend have gradually become intertwined, until giving rise to a narrative that still today continues to arouse legitimate interest, but also debates and sometimes attempts at new research in the area. It's a very peculiar story, that of the gold of the Bank of Italy in the Austro-Hungarian fortress of the town of Franzensfest. It's a story that deserves to be known, which touches on some topics we've already covered or will cover in the coming days. And it fits into that chaotic ending of the Second World War with the escapes of the leaders, ministers, and generals, or simply the attempt of the defeated troops to return home. They became intertwined with other events involving precious materials previously stolen from countries occupied by the Nazis and their allies. Materials that for a long time were difficult to recover, or that, in part, never returned at all.
Non tornarono mai a casa.
Today we try to shed light on one of these episodes, the one concerning the gold of Banca d'Italia, kept inside or near an old Austro-Hungarian fortress, a portion of which never returned. A true mystery, an Italian mystery as well. To fully understand our story and also the role of the fortress of Fortezza in this affair, the story we will tell you today, it is necessary to start from the history of the place itself, whose name, Franzensfeste, simply means Fortress of Francesco. Francesco Bimerti d'Asburgo, Emperor of Austria, authorized the construction of a huge barrier fort in the Isarco Valley between 1833 and 1838. This fort, which is built on 3 levels, the highest, the intermediate, and the lowest, was meant to protect southern Tyrol from possible invasions coming from the Po Valley. After all, the echoes of the Napoleonic Wars had not yet faded. Let me remind you that during the Napoleonic period, Tyrol was invaded by the French and their Bavarian allies, with resistance led by Andreas Hofer and the other Tyrolean leaders. It was precisely Tyrol's loyalty that impressed the Habsburg crown to the point that the imperial royal government decided to invest in fortification and protection works for the area. Although the military technologies applied at the time were cutting edge, technological progress in weaponry made the fortress increasingly less practical and secure. This is why the fort had already been disarmed at the end of the 19th century, maintaining only its function as a logistical depot and exchange area. With the end of the Great War, the entire area had been incorporated into the Kingdom of Italy, which continued to use the old fortress as a military depot. But when Italy is forced into another armistice, this time with the Allies, the Armistice of Cassibile in September 1943, something happens. We know that the country falls into a situation of extreme institutional and military uncertainty. Within a few days, the German troops, some of whom had already entered Italy, occupy most of the peninsula, disarm numerous Italian units, and take control of the main military, administrative, and industrial centers. The government and the monarchy, on the other hand, take refuge in the south, already controlled by the Americans. But we've already talked about all this. What interests us is that in this chaotic scenario, characterized by the rapid dissolution of the state's infrastructure and the need to secure control over the available economic resources, the gold reserves of the Bank of Italy take on a central importance, since they represent one of the fundamental tools through which a state can guarantee its financial stability and maintain international credibility, even more so in a context dominated by total war. The Italian gold reserves at the time consisted mainly of ingots, coins, and other precious materials, all accumulated over the decades and all kept mainly in the vaults of the Bank of Italy in Rome. The value of this treasure was not simply economic, but also political. All of this represented one of the few resources that could be immediately used to secure new loans, to support international financial operations, to purchase raw materials, and above all, to ensure the stability of the national monetary system, and more. The Nazi leadership had already decided that in the occupied countries, various national treasures would be looted to strengthen the stock of precious materials belonging to the German Reich. This had already happened with the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. For national strengthening, the operation to transfer the reserves was organized with extreme secrecy and under military control, demonstrating the importance attributed to the entire operation. I'll give you just a few figures so you can try to better understand the importance of this transfer. Overseeing the operation is Herbert Kappler, the future executioner of the Ardeatine massacre. It is Kappler who has the entire gold reserve seized and transferred to Milan on the night between September 22nd and 23rd, 1943. And it's still Kappler who arranges for the organization of 3 armored train convoys to transport the gold to the depot at Fortezza. The convoys depart on scheduled dates. The first leaves on February 29th, 1944. Destination: Reich Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Berlin, 55 tons of gold. The second carrying gold on board, 1.5 tons. It leaves on April 19th, 1944. The last convoy leaves on October 21st, 1944. In total, over 102 tons of gold and valuables are moved. Material that is sent to Fortezza and then transferred to the Reich, or to Bern, where the German authorities have already opened accounts and safety deposit boxes to store part of the treasures looted from half of Europe, with which they could then start trade operations paid for in hard currency or gold to fuel the war machine. After October 21, 1944, the Bank of Italy's treasure basically disappears. You have to wait until May 17, 1945. The war in Europe has already been over for 9 days. On May 8, 1945, the German High Command signed the unconditional surrender of its forces. 9 days later, the U.S. Fifth Army moves up the Isarco and reaches Fortezza. They take the area without firing a single shot. After all, there's no need anymore. Inside one of the fortified vaults, the GIs find 25 tons of gold. That's about $7 billion. And how much is left of the Bank of Italy's treasure? That treasure, which was stored in 153 barrels and 55 safety deposit boxes, was returned by the Allies only after 3 years and a thorough inventory. However, the rest is missing. 79 tons that were supposed to reach Berlin are missing, but officially, they never arrived in Berlin. What happened to them? Who took them? Where were they diverted to? According to the documents kept at the Fortezza Logistics Depot, those 3 armored trains followed the planned route, 2 towards Fortezza and 1 towards the Swiss border. The Swiss deny any details. But then, are those documents real? Are they fake? Or have they been forged? And above all, did the convoys that arrived at Fortezza then leave again? And if so, in which direction? And if they left with a specific destination, did they arrive? There's something that doesn't add up in this story. This is proven by the fact that, after a few weeks, the American military police arrested the mayor of Fortezza, who held one of the keys to the secure vault. The Americans remain suspicious. They fear that some accomplice of the Nazis in the area may have hidden a large part of the treasure. For this reason, they even resort to inspecting the land with metal detectors. But they don't find anything. They search the pastures for the animals, the tunnels of the fortress, the nearby caves, even some of the mountains in the Dolomites. But nothing is found. Where did those gold bars, those crates, those precious coins end up? Where are they? So, our story must now intertwine with another story. That one, as we mentioned, about the gold of the Yugoslav Central Bank. Another treasure looted by the Nazis a few years earlier, in 1941, and whose trail went cold for a long time. The armored train that had come up the Balkans from Belgrade had also stopped, coincidentally, at Fortezza. In that case, too, The Yugoslavs reported a shortage of several tons at the time of restitution. Someone kept for themselves or diverted elsewhere a significant portion of the loot. Some of the Yugoslav gold bars would be found many years later in Arezzo, at Villa Vanda, the residence of Licio Gelli, the head of P2. It has been established that before the 1970s, on at least 3 occasions, Gelli reportedly went alone to the Fortezza area by car. Perhaps Gelli knew about some of the hidden deposits of the gold brought to Fortezza, deposits whose whereabouts he never wanted to reveal. In fact, he has always denied their existence. But those gold bars, hidden in a rather crude way in the flower pots of his villa, show that Gelli must have known something. But the legend of the gold of Fortezza continues through the decades. It doesn't stop in the 60s. In the 80s, something else happens. The escape of Herbert Kappler from the Celio Military Hospital takes place, where he is hospitalized as a terminally ill patient. Kappler, sentenced to life imprisonment for the Ardeatine massacre, is hidden in a heavy suitcase by his wife and taken away. He reappears in Germany. Why are we interested in this story about Kappler? Because in 1983, the investigating judge of Trento, Carlo Palermo, opens a judicial investigation which also involves an engineer named Luigi Cavalloni. Cavalloni had previously claimed to be certain that at Fortezza, either inside a secret tunnel of the fortification or nearby, there was still gold, either Yugoslav or Italian. And what Judge Palermo gathers is the suspicion that Cavalloni traded Kappler's escape from Celio for the location of at least one of these secret deposits. After all, Kappler was not only the executioner of the Ardeatine massacre, but previously the man who had organized the train convoys that had brought the Italian treasure there to the Isacco Valley. But the judicial investigation ends with a dismissal. There is no concrete evidence. Cavalloni, as early as 1977, asked the Ministry of Defense, which, after all, oversees it. The Fortezza fort is still partially classified as an Italian army facility. Permission to investigate and obtain permits to access the fort. For cultural and historical reasons, he says. In reality, Cavalloni is convinced that there is still gold, and he is looking for it. But it's not easy to move inside the Fortezza fort. It's not easy for 2 reasons. The first reason is because it's still a military facility. The second is because, until the late 1980s, the fort was also used as a powder magazine. So Cavalloni can't move around on his own, and always has to be accompanied by engineers to make sure he doesn't put his hand or foot on something dangerous. Cavalloni's research, however, doesn't lead to any results. The engineer ends up in the newspapers a few times, either because of Judge Palermo's investigation or because of the hiring process. The persistent and stubborn belief about this missing gold. And yet, Cavalloni must have known something. On November 15, 2005, during new searches conducted inside the bunker within the fort, that bunker, with that armored vault that held the gold, a mold for ingots was discovered. A mold without the hallmark stamp of the ingot. This can mean only one thing, that Fortezza was not just a storage facility, but even an illegal foundry, where the Nazis not only transported and stored that treasure, but also melted it down to make it untraceable. It's a possibility. The discovery of that mold is proof of it, but it's not the only part of our story. In April 1943, according to various correspondences, part of the Bank of Italy's treasure, the treasure that doesn't add up, was supposedly sent to the Bolzano branch, and then to Switzerland. 10 tons of gold were supposedly used to pay off debts contracted well before the war by the Italian state industry. Another 12 tons supposedly ended up in Basel, also in a protected account. When September 8th comes, when Italy is split in two, when the Italian Social Republic emerges, the puppet state created by Hitler and led by Mussolini, it was the RSI itself that allowed the Germans to transfer a portion to Berlin to be reserved for the nation. So 50 tons of those kept in Fortezza, out of the 100 brought to Fortezza, leave from there heading north towards Germany. The second shipment, and therefore the material found on site by the Americans, never leaves, because an official from the Bank of Italy, a certain Bombassaro, once he learned of the Germans' intentions, sent a coded message to the Allied command, requesting the bombing of the fortress and the railway. A bombing in the area does occur. It doesn't hit the fortress, but it does hit the Brenner Pass, slowing down railway traffic. And here, another mystery emerges. With those train cars blocked on the tracks a few days later, a so-called International Committee of the Red Cross would show up to take custody of the contents of those trains and transport them under safe conduct to Switzerland. But they would never reach Switzerland. The train was supposed to go down toward Bolzano, then head up toward Murano, and from Murano aim for Glorenza. After that, we have no trace of any of it. What remains are those last tons of gold, the ones returned in 1948 to the new Italian Republic by the American authorities. But the rest? What happened to it? Who took it? Who kept it in custody? Who hid it? And where? One of the many theories put forward during this long historical period concerns those very gold bars, which were later found in other banks. Swiss banks, but not only there, also in Madrid, Tangier, and Beirut, with the Reich's eagle stamped on them. For a certain period, it was believed that those Nazi gold bars were nothing more than a remelting of the gold bars and valuables looted in Rome and Belgrade. But there is no decisive proof of this, also because in reality, some of those gold bars, they came from other raids on private property, or even from the dental prostheses of prisoners in concentration and extermination camps. Prostheses that were torn from their rightful owners before or after the so-called special treatment, and then became the property of the economic department of the SS. But the question still remains today. More than 80 years have passed, but it is still not fully clear what happened to those tons of gold. They can't have just vanished into thin air. They can't have disappeared or evaporated. Who took them? For what purpose? Where did they take them? Where did they hide them? Why weren't they returned? These are questions that no one has wanted to answer, and they are questions that still linger today in the Franzensfest area. If you go to the area, if you ask to visit the fort, today it has become a museum. It has set opening hours you can visit it, even if not entirely. You will always hear at least one tourist ask the guide that question. What happened to the gold of Fortezza? The guide won't be able to tell you anything other than that there was an armored bunker used as a storage, but most of that treasure left no trace behind. You can think whatever you want. You can come up with any theory, but we have no certainties. We only know that someone took that gold, and we can imagine why they didn't want to give it back. When valuables, treasures disappear, it's hard to get them back. Almost all the art treasures that were looted by the Nazis during the last war have been recovered. But treasures made of precious materials, for the most part, never made it back home. And we can imagine the reason, which is unpleasant to have to say or even just to think about. But as Giulio Andreotti used to say, thinking the worst is a sin, but often you're right.